All right, well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our fourth roundtable session in our second series of Challenging Discrimination on addressing discrimination in the 2SLGBTQIA community. I would like to use this opportunity to thank the funder of this program, the Edmonton Community Foundation. They made it possible for this program to continue this year. And we'd also like to note that we have live subtitles turned on. However, if you are not seeing them, please make sure you turn them on in the settings area. So we'll just wait a few more moments to let some more people join us, and then we'll get started. Thank you. Thank you, Jeffrey. Okay. So we're gathered here today on a Miskwichi-Wiskaikan traditional Treaty 6 territory of the First Nations and the Métis Nation of Alberta Zone 4. We respectfully acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this land for generations, including the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Nakota, Blackfoot, as well as the Métis and Inuit. This land is and has been a welcoming place for all peoples who come to Edmonton and call it home. It is a place built for community, trade, friendship, and shared understanding. We recognize those Indigenous peoples who are still fighting for equality today, and we support them in the spirit of decolonization and reconciliation. We remain committed to honoring the struggle of our Indigenous siblings and joining with them to end injustice. Together, we call upon all of our collected honored traditions and ancestors to help us work together in the spirit of community and understanding today and ever onwards. So why do we do treaty acknowledgements? We are all treaty people. Long ago, when the first settlers came to this land, they drafted treaties that the Indigenous peoples signed in goodwill and good faith. Those settlers and settlers up until today have not always honored those treaties. The treaties were meant to honor the traditional land and way of life of the Indigenous peoples, to ensure their rights and prosperity, and to build understanding and mutual cooperation. Today, we acknowledge the treaty land as a way to recommit to honoring the spirit of those treaties and to recognize the continued rights of Indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of this land. We recognize that many Indigenous peoples have been dispossessed of their land and traditional ways of life, and along with that, the prosperity that came along with it. We acknowledge the treaty to understand we all have a role to play as treaty people in reconciliation and in righting the historical wrongs that have taken place. We would also invite you, if you feel comfortable, to share what treaty area you are in, if you're joining us from outside of Treaty 6 tonight, or even if you're in Treaty 6. So a little bit about us. Since our establishment in 1993, the Center for Race and Culture, formerly known as the Northern Alberta Alliance on Race Relations, has brought together diverse people with an interest in promoting and supporting individual, collective, and systemic change to address discrimination and racism and to encourage intercultural understanding. We take an intersectional approach, and our expertise spans workplace development, community building, research, and education. If you would like to learn more about current events, projects, or activities, please visit our website and sign up for our newsletter. This session is part of a new initiative called Challenging Discrimination Through Community Conversations, an ongoing series of online moderated roundtables and webinars with guest speakers from diverse communities, organizations, academia, and the general public. We seek to understand and address experiences of discrimination and inclusion in the Canadian context. By shining the spotlight on different forms of discrimination, such as anti-Black racism and anti-Indigenous racism, amongst other topics, we hope to encourage solidarity among groups and individuals interested in learning how to promote social inclusion and equity. We will have an upcoming session next month entitled Community Encampments and How to Be an Ally to Community Members Experiencing Homelessness on December 15th. 2021, and you can find out more information on our website. Next, we will launch some polls on your screen collecting anonymous demographic data. You don't have to answer, but if you do, it helps us to understand our audience better. So we'll just take like a moment or two for that, a minute or two. It should be popping up on your screen. Let me know if you are seeing it. You know what? It seems like it's not working tonight, but it's okay. We will be sending you an email after this event, and it will have these same questions and just a little bit to ask you about your experience at our event tonight. Okay. So next, I would like to introduce you to our speakers for this evening, starting with Marni Panas. And Marni is a program manager for diversity and inclusion with Alberta Health Services. She holds a degree in health administration and is a Canadian certified inclusion professional. And she currently serves as an interim board chair at the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion. Marni was part of the work that led to gender identity and gender expression being added as protected grounds to Alberta and Canada's Human Rights Acts, and has contributed to policy protecting human rights for individuals at all levels of government across Canada. She was also a member of the advisory committee that helped draft the apology that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau delivered to LGBTQ2S people in Canada in the House of Commons in 2017. Marni was nominated as the YWCA Woman of Distinction, received the Human Rights Award from the John Humphrey Center for Peace and Human Rights, and was named a 2018 Global Edmonton Woman of Vision. She has been invited to share her experiences and expertise on inclusion, inclusive health, and cultural safety for diverse healthcare providers, patients, and their families, locally, nationally, and internationally. You can often hear Marni on local and national media, and she has appeared on CNN and the BBC. Marni is also a transgender woman who has been very transparent throughout her journey in the hopes of fostering acceptance through education and respectful dialogue. You can also learn more about Marni in her TED Talk called Finding Courage, Conquering Fear. And next, I'd like to introduce you to Jeffery Chalifoux. Jeffery Chalifoux was born and raised in Amiskwaciwa, Wisconsin. He is an Indigenous Two-Spirit father and a Nehiyah Cree citizen of Métis Nation. Jeffery uses they, them, or he, him pronouns and is an advocate for sexual and gender diverse minority communities. Currently on break from graduate clinical social work studies, Jeffery is also a co-founder and former co-chair and now the executive director of the Edmonton Two-Spirit Society. He strives to foster inclusion of two spirits in our society, and he sits on the Two-Spirit Council of Fierté Canada Pride, the board of directors of the National Enchanté Network, as well as the Alberta College of Social Workers Sexual and Gender Diversity Committee. Jeffery is also well known for their specialized work around chemsex with the Edmonton Men's Health Collective in the development, delivering, and scale up of the peer-in-peer harm reduction program, supporting the 2SLGBTQ community in reducing harms associated with sexualized substance abuse. Aptly so, as he openly shares his lived experiences through homelessness, 20 years of active substance use, and over a decade survived through correctional systems, which strongly correlate with his sexual and gender identities. Jeffery enjoys adventuring with their son, traveling far and wide, volunteering, and has recently begun delving into new beading and crafting hobbies in his free time. Lastly, I'd like to introduce you to our moderator for this evening, Shalini Sinha. Shalini Sinha is a longtime equity, diversity, and inclusion consultant and educator delivering services for national, provincial, and municipal governments, large non-for-profits, business, and grassroots community groups. She is an experienced media broadcaster, columnist, and public speaker. As an academic, she researched and lectured on the intersection of gender and racism. As an entrepreneur, she provides services to entrepreneurs who care about social and climate justice to strengthen and grow their enterprise and increase their influence. Her proudest community moments are delivering her TEDx talk, Are You Consciously Creating a Culture of Respect? And being invited to speak as a change maker at the event hosting His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Ireland. Personally, she has been a social and climate justice activist since her teens, is as Indian as she is Irish and Canadian, and is a fan of stand-up comedy. Shalini currently chairs the City of Edmonton's Anti-Racism Advisory Committee and services on the board for the Pride Center of Edmonton. You can connect with her on LinkedIn at Shalini Respect, on Twitter at Shalini_respect, or on Instagram at Shalini.respect. And now I will hand off the event to our wonderful moderator, Shalini. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here at the table with these two wonderful individuals. Jeffery, Marni, my hope for this hour that we have with community to talk about discrimination within the LGBTQ2S plus community, or aimed at, is that we are able to have a free-flowing conversation that, you know, helps this community understand the issues better and offers some insights. So let's start with something that tends to come up regularly when people are starting to come into this space, which is that they're quite confused around terminology. I think people bring forward the message like, this thing is always changing. What is that about? What are all these letters? What are all these symbols? And I know it's the very basic level that we all have to deal with, but because it comes up regularly, let's just start there. And maybe I'll start with yourself, Marni, to just talk a little bit about how and why terminology does change over time.
Well, you know, thank you. I'm so excited to be here with my dear friend and chosen family, Jeff. So good to see you and you folks as well. Yeah, terminology, you know, often my son calls me daddy. And that stresses a whole bunch of people out because, you know, people think, oh, you know, the world's going to fall apart when we start to use words that weren't intended for for different words and different reasons. But the fact is, words are made up. Humans make them up, they're descriptors, and they evolve over time. And the only two people in the whole world it matters to that he calls me daddy is him and me. That's it. And in fact, nobody else. And that's the beauty part of our community. Yeah, we have the rainbow alphabet, you know, LGBTQ2S and all the letters that can be added to that. And it is evolving all the time. It is changing all the time. We are not a homogeneous group of people. We are as diverse as the world around us. And that's what's beautiful. And I think what's really important is that we honor the labels and the names and the words that people use to describe themselves. And if we don't know what that means, you know, if we hear pansexual and it's the first time we've heard the word, it's what does it mean to you? And approach that through curiosity, not through judgment, not through through our own lens, but you know, what does it mean to you? Because it could mean something different to somebody else. So, and in recognizing that it changes, and that's okay because we as humans change every day. So let's not get hung up on trying to be perfect, but about trying to meet people where they're at and learning what labels they use to identify themselves with, and take the time to learn, and not just talk to the one trans person that you know to teach you everything there is about the trans world, but you know, to take the time to learn and do some emotional labor to figure that out. Those are my first thoughts that come to mind.
Nice, nice. And I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you framing and giving this wonderful story about how these are human relationships that we're trying to describe. It's someone's relationship with themselves, it's someone's relationship with the people around them. And also that can change with different people, and it can change over time as those relationships change. Jeffrey, let me give you a chance to come in here and speak to this.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. And thanks for having me here as well. Marni, love seeing you, love continuing all of our awesome conversations we have all the time. I concur. I definitely concur with all that Marni is sharing. And, you know, to give this some more context from, you know, my culture's perspective, or from my perspective, I speak for myself. And, you know, look at it like language. Look at that shift in language. Look at our culture and what's happened for us as Indigenous peoples to try to adapt and try to hold on to our language. But, you know, even in thinking of the two-spirit term itself and understanding where the depth of that language comes from, or that terminology, the 2S, and you know, there's so much to that. We look at that like identity is very fluid for us, right? We see two spirits as transcending that boundary set by that binary of male and female, and we restore that fluidity in those roles amongst our own culture and traditions. And what we see is our youth, and we see our language. We see many of us in this squared circle right now have seen that language shift over time, even in their own use and own identity for themselves. People may have changed that. One day they're a parent, the day before they were not, right? Then their language and their terminology changes a little bit, and their little being grows up around them. My little guy, he's 8 years old. Ovs, oh, that's so chill, Dad, and all kinds of different language and little things that they have now. And same with us, like when with us, not with myself, is we don't know exactly what that terminology can be, but the importance of understanding who the person is as opposed to how they may come to identify themselves, but understanding that for yourselves, right?
Mhm.
My terminology has changed significantly and shifted over time.
Yeah, lovely. I really do relate to those
Yeah.
ideas too. And I think a lot of our listeners will relate to it as well. And it reminds me too about how terminology changes so much in many different movements, not just in this movement for liberation of people in the 2S plus LGBTQ community. But so for example, I was a young teen environmentalist, and we used to talk about greenhouse gases and the greenhouse effect. Then we started to talk about climate. Then we started to talk about climate change. And now we're talking about the climate emergency. And even in something there where someone isn't figuring out how they identify themselves, terminology changes as we understand it. Certainly happens in the anti-racism movement as people are figuring out what words suit them the most. And one of the things that I really love in this community here, in our community, is the way this movement contributes to everybody to help everyone push past limits and boundaries and be flexible and to understand the human identity as being quite fluid and flexible and not put into these divisive boxes. And maybe I'll give you both a chance to just, expand on that a little bit more, of the joy or the beauty that comes when people really understand or embrace what the 2S LGBTQIA plus community is offering to the world. Jeffrey, can I let you continue with your train of thought, and then we'll come back to Marni on that?
Yeah, I love that. I was just getting ready to jump on that one. Yeah, just understanding the people when they're coming into understanding themselves and understanding this terminology, this mechanism, this method of which we have for understanding and communicating with each other, so that we know how we hold those similarities. And for some, they may have those view of what are our differences as well, and how do we bring those skills or those together so that we're holding a safer space together, and a power greater than us just sitting by ourselves. When we have two people trying to understand each other, that terminology is good to communicate with, for sure. But I want to share in some of the outreach we do at E2S over at Pride Corner on White Ave. We have some of our staff are heading out there and on a weekly basis. Of course, it's winter here again now, so we got to get people ready and adjusted to our climate change here, well, our seasonal change. And when we are out there and we're on the ground, we're meeting our community face to face, we're addressing those with that discrimination, but we're also creating a space for people to come forward and to learn more. That's that part that we see a lot of people really addressing their own knowledge or their own quest to understand more. While we're out there doing that outreach, we that's where we meet people. That's where people are just coming to learn for the very first time that there's an existence of a two-spirit collective, like a community and traditions and culture, and that visibility. So yeah, I'll turn that over to you there, Marni. What were your thoughts on that?
What do we have to offer? I love the question. I think it's a beautiful question, because when I came into work, I think about, being trans is one adjective of hundreds which describes this human that is in front of you. I'm a parent, I'm a professional, I'm all of these other things. I also happen to have a very real lived experience as a trans person. There's no doubt about it. And I think I often, as a member of Alberta Health Services, that's where a lot of my focus is. I transitioned while no, I transitioned because I worked in the environment that I did at Stollery Children's Hospital at the time, because I worked with people who were really truly in the business to care about each other. But where I really realized the power of what we have to offer is about anybody on this call. When you can bring your whole self to the space that you're in, where you feel safe, first of all, safe first and foremost, then we can talk about a sense of belonging and inclusion, all of the other things. And I remember very specifically, was soon after my transition, I was implementing a new initiative in the intensive care unit, the neonatal intensive care unit. I was meeting all these parents at bedside, all these different stages of serious illness, I'd never felt more confident. I'd never felt more engaging. I'd never felt more alive at work. And this is right after my transition, because I didn't have to spend all of that energy hiding who I was. I could invest that in my work, in the people who I care about at that bedside. And this one mom was holding her baby and she wished me happy Mother's Day. I was called a mom and a dad the first time in this room. And our research tells us this, but my real lived experience tells us this: when we create an environment where everybody feels that they can bring their whole self to their experience, whatever it is, as a colleague, everybody on this call, the people that you work with, patients who are accessing healthcare, but in the workplace, when you can truly bring your whole self, whether it's your sexuality, gender, race, ability, disability, your age, you're happier, you're more productive, you're more creative. The people around you are more productive, more creative. And for me, that has a direct impact on the quality of care that we provide. Right? So it's really about, what do we have to offer? I think about all of these organizations who have amazing trans and two-spirit and LGBTQ plus people in their workplace, that what amazing untapped potential. Because if we can really create a space where they feel valued and included and safe, they contribute more. And so there's just so much untapped potential. So what we have to offer is profound.
Yeah, bang on there. Thank you, Marnie. And I was just thinking, what we have to offer is I was actually swinging into allyship. I was thinking on another thought when you had
Exactly.
mentioned that. Yeah,
Exactly, Jeffrey. And I'll let our moderator, our people here, move on the slide, because I could see how this is moving into our second question. Thank you. Continue, and I'll clear it up later.
Okay. Oh, great. Okay, I'm gonna have a drink of water here first, and then I'll continue. Yeah, I was just thinking about, all these skill sets that we all have, and we all live in this world together, and we have all of these major things going on in our world: global warming, all these things that we talk about, our land, and being safe together. And I mentioned that we can go down that train of thought where we have our similarities or we have our differences, and that causes a division amongst people and amongst networks and amongst ideologies and values and beliefs and so on and so forth. And when we talk about this and being effective allies in our community, as an Indigenous, as a two-spirit person, one is really understanding your connection to the land and understanding what gifts the land has, and really giving respect to that, and what we use and utilize individually, and then what we use and utilize collectively, and to support those that hold those similar terminologies with you or within your own community, such as the 2SLGBTQ community. And one of the things that E2S is very fortunate to sit at is at the center of this 2SLGBTQ network here in Edmonton, to really look at some of the turmoil that's been happening in our city around discrimination and inequality within our community, and in our own what would be and what should be our festivities and our celebrations. And we're finding this division that's there, right? We're seeing these people focusing on the differences, and yes, we have differences. We may be different organizations, different individuals with different missions, different values, all of that. But those similarities, what are those gifts that we bring together? And the allyship, especially for us Indigenous peoples, is understanding the land, where you are, who you are situated there, who's around you. Because here we are, we're in this squared circle now. We're all holding space at this moment. And I sat in several meetings today, and I asked around the table, who was born at the Royal Alec here downtown Edmonton, right? And every single call, there's somebody that could put their hand up, and we create that connection, right? You may have been looking for a difference, but here I found a similarity, right? And we can grow from that. We can grow from that. And we've gone around many circles to try to find ways to shift our ways of thinking in that division, and how we're connected together. So yeah, thank you.
I love that. I love, especially as you were talking about getting ourselves grounded with the land and the gifts that it offers. And I found that my mind wandered, imagining those times when I've walked on the land, and then thinking about what is here and what are the gifts. I got such a grounding sense. And that grounding sense also reminds me of what comes in when we talk about the safety that Marni was talking about, the safety that's provided into a workplace. And when someone can really be themselves, I know for myself, the more I am able to connect with all parts of myself, the more centered and truly internally powerful I feel. Let me build on this question here that we have about how can we be more effective allies? And I'm wondering if I can come back to you on this, Marni, and if we can talk about what does it look like in the behaviors or the actions that people take? So this is where we're calling on people outside this community who help create environments. And you did talk about your workplace and the kind of workplace you were in that was so safe that you could be yourself there. What are the behaviors and actions that make that safety, that create that kind of environment?
Oh gosh, there's just so many things that people can do. So I'm just going to list a whole bunch of things that come to mind. First, your first question is the right question, is how can I be your ally? What more do I need to know about who you are so I can be the best ally? But asking that question, then listening without judgment, not putting your own lens onto it. Being ally is a verb, not necessarily a noun. It's the actions. What are you doing every single day to be that ally? It's to continue to learn about yourself, about the land, about your relationship with the people around you. An ally always looks around, is keenly aware of the space they take up in a room, because an ally often comes from a place of power and their own privilege, and looking around who is at this table, who's not at this table, and ensuring that there's space for them. So using your power and your privilege to create that space. An ally takes the time to educate about the language to be used, about the individual and the community. And again, not going to that one person to do all the emotional labor for you. You got to do that labor on your own. An ally still listens. And I keep going back to the listening. You got to listen. An ally learns what's offensive and just doesn't do it. It doesn't say it. It's pretty simple, right? And not saying, not to try and rationalize and justify and say, oh, it's just a joke. Once you know something is hurtful, you just don't do it. So an ally, it's some of the things you don't do. An ally doesn't make assumptions. An ally is humble and learns through curiosity and wanting to do better. An ally for sure never outs somebody's sexual orientation, gender identity. You never out somebody. That is only ever their story to tell, because it could put somebody at risk of discrimination, harassment, or even worse. I think about, as an ally, you could also take on some backlash. And this is what we need. We need our allies, because we are a small group of people. I think of trans people. There aren't a lot of us, but enough that are getting hurt every single day. So we need our allies to share some of that burden. And you will get backlash. There's no doubt about it. An ally learns how to be an upstander, not just to be a bystander and watching things going on, but an ally learns how to be an upstander. And maybe you as an ally can't intervene in the moment when somebody's being treated poorly. Maybe it's not safe for you. You always have to look at your own safety. So an ally checks in then, do something. Doing nothing is never an option. Do something, anything. And so maybe I think about this weekend was Trans Day of Remembrance. It was a tough weekend. And quite frankly, the abuse that trans people have taken, this is the highest number of people who have been killed because of their trans and two-spirit and non-binary identities around the world. And we're seeing a rise in anti-trans media stories and amplification by people who should know better. And it's been hard on us. And it's really, really hard. So you need to check in with your trans and non-binary spirit people. How are you doing? Is there anything I can do? Because I got to tell you, for somebody who has a big voice like I do, and I use it well, I've been silenced a few times because of my own fear for my safety. So you got to check in with your trans and queer siblings. It could be something simple. I know a lot of people ask, should I put my pronouns on my Zoom link like we have here? And I say, yeah, I mean, whether it's email or what have you, because that means I'm not doing it. And if you notice, I don't put my pronouns on here because it's usually a test to see how many else, who else is doing, because the more you talk about pronouns, the less I have to. Again, sharing some of that burden. And I'll give you a great example. You mentioned the apology that I helped draft with Prime Minister Trudeau that went to LGBTQ+ people. The first day when we all met in Ottawa and we all looked around the table and said, okay, let's start writing this thing, let's start working. The first thing realized was, where are our two-spirit people? And I said, we cannot go forward without two-spirit people at this table. And so we just stopped. in that moment and ensured. And then we came back to Ottawa a couple of weeks later and ensured that we had two-spirit identity. So again, I recognize allyship is contextual. There are days when I can be an ally, and there are days where I need an ally. And so I recognize that my own privilege is contextual. And there are moments where I find myself at the table. And there's moments where I need somebody to create that space for me at the table. So those are a lot of things I threw at you all at once.
You love it. I love it. I love a whole list. Let me give Jeffrey a chance. Do you have something to add to that list? Or did you also want to come at this question from another perspective maybe? And so the question is about what are the behaviors and actions that demonstrate effective allyship, and also considering it in terms of everyone is contributing to the environment that we're in. And some people have more power and they're contributing much more to the environment that we're all stepping into.
Yes, exactly. And, I just love that TED Talk, allyship, Marni Panas right there. It was great. Really delved into, many aspects of what allyship is and could be, and how we could look at those behaviors to make that possible and to be seen and to be, again, that learning and growth, so that we are all inhabiting and making this a better space, whether it's this circle or that circle for them, so on and so forth. I really like that, like when you talked about heading in to make that help with that apology, right? Similarly, others are standing in allyship with, let's say for us 2S folks, two-spirit folks, they're off giving testimony on the health of the LGBTQ 2S community, but there's not a lot of 2S representation there, right? And people open that to say, just what Marni was saying, right? Somebody said, hey, where's our 2S folks? Who's not represented at this table? Where's the voices, right? And people will make that space safe and available and feel natural, like a natural space, not that checking a box space. Like they say, okay, we got all of this, but yeah, we sort of do that mentally as well, but not as, and I forget the term for, just the checkbox stuff, but there is that term that's been going around. So I'm going to take a moment to just recollect. I need to have another drink and get my throat going again. So I apologize.
Absolutely. I'm going to move us through. There's a place where I'm heading, which is coming back to this piece you were talking about, Marni, about the contextual diversities there, the relationships each of us can be in one position or another at any time. I'm going to come to that, but just before I do, let's go on to this next question here, which is about, I had this in a different order, so that's okay. So yeah, no, that's perfect. This is exactly where we're heading here then. Which is this idea here. So I do want to hear about what your thoughts are on how this community is responding to racism and building anti-racism into the community. And part of that, I suppose, is also growing on understanding this fact that humans come with so many parts to our identity. And we're never always in one position. We're never always in an under-resourced, underrepresented position. We do have parts of our identity often that are drawing power and privilege, and we bring these things all at the same time, and these affect all our relationships. So when I think of myself, as a BIPOC person also in the queer community, I'm thinking about this all the time. How do we build anti-racism into the queer community? How do we build 2S LGBTQ plus liberation within the anti-racism movement? These extend to lots of places. So yeah, let me start with yourself, Marni, I apologize because I put out two different tones there with that question. So one is about racism and responding in the community, and then also just building on. So pick it up anywhere you want to pick it up, anywhere you feel inspired there.
Oh, sure. Well, I am definitely inspired by all of the things that are being said here today. So I'll do my best. I again, because the bulk of my work actually in the last year has been on anti-racism. And it might surprise a lot of people. And I think about, again, when we talk about finding yourself at the table, I've got a position within the organization that I have some influence, some power. So what do? As a trans person, I recognize my own privilege as a trans person, which might surprise a lot of people because, as I said, privilege is contextual. So yeah, I've had threats. I don't have parents in my life. I know what it's like to phone 911 and be denied service because I'm trans when I'm asking for police support. I know what that feels like, and it's not great because I know when my life is at risk. But I also know that I'm white. I look like what society says a woman should look like in a very binary world. I am able-bodied, so within within the context of my trans siblings, I have a lot of privilege, and I found myself in a great position to be able to do something with that. And so we started very early on, a year and a half ago, in our anti-racism journey at Alberta Health Services. That I looked around, I said, what can I do as this person with all this privilege? And the first thing we did was ensure that we had members of the Indigenous, Black, people of color of our workforce lead this work. And within that, the people who became part of this advisory group that created the anti-racism position statement and the anti-racism report and recommendations, which you can now see online, and I can share the link for you later. It was led by Indigenous, Black, people of color within Alberta Health Services. But what was really important when we put this group together was recognizing the intersectionality of everybody within there, ensuring that there were different ages, queer identities were part of it. Part of the work was a trans male who's Black, and I'm a white trans woman, and our experiences were relatable but so different, because it is of our belief that when you create an environment where one group of people feels a bit safer, just a bit more valued, a bit more included in their workplace, in the healthcare system, everybody benefits from that. We all, as a society, benefit from that. We start to raise the bar of what we expect from each other. And so that's what I think about, what I've been able to do with my own privilege in helping guide the anti-racism work. But by doing so, it wasn't meaning that I led it. It means that, we created a space for Indigenous, Black, people of color to do this.
That's so appreciative, actually, just what you're talking about, which is bringing in some awareness and insight, but creating space to bring people to the table who can speak to this. Tell me, Jeffrey, what are your thoughts on this issue?
Well, I had a lot of thoughts streaming there, but I'll hone in on a couple here. And Marni, I really thank you for that, and really establishing the importance of being aware and mindful of our own power or biases, and how we use that privilege, the power of that privilege that we do hold. So to go a bit further about what is the community doing to respond to some of the racism and building anti-racism within the community. There has been, there has been turmoil in our community. There has been things going on in which, we've had a shift and a refocus of just this, to understand how there is inequality in this racism within our own networks here, and how systemic some of these things are. I go back to one of the comments that came from one of our attendees, talking about why Two-Spirit people were not reached out to first. Why were they an afterthought? And to touch a little bit more on that, I can go into a lot of history of colonization of our people and the eradication of our culture and traditions. That is one of the reasons why, and we're still feel those impacts to this day. We're still not included at all tables. However, that being said, what is happening now is we are being held space safely, and naturally space is being provided, and not just offered. It's just naturally that space that we as Two-Spirit people, now an organization that has more visibility and staff and resources and supports, people are building that anti-racism with that, right? We're gaining more visibility. We are able to be out there so that people can see us, our youth can see us, policymakers can see us, change makers are there, and they're at the table and they're inviting us in. That's what's been happening, and that's what's really been most impactful for us, to see how the community is coming together to look at our gifts and bring them together. Back in 2018 here in Edmonton, there was a stand at the parade to address some of the concerns and safety for our community, and where they were feeling these impacts of racism and discrimination and being differented, and that division. Since that time, a lot of work has happened within our community, dissolving of an organization, restructuring and rebuilding of other organizations, including that diversity, who's at the table of leadership, where's the focus of that? And people are asking for that, and they're being more visible and asking for that. We hear Marni and we hear others that they're out there and at the forefront. There's campaigns of advocacy happening all around us, and there's so many people that are jumping on board to understand and learn the terminologies, to learn what's going on for the people in our community, to understand that depth of how to be allies and help, and how to be addressing racism and all that. I go further, this network that we're developing, or that is developed, E2S is honored to sit with the funding support of our government to lead that, to hold that space with our elder leading in good ways, for us to look at what was being said in all of these meetings and summits and these conversations with us. And we're putting that together, and we're action items. Our behaviors are just reaching all these different actions that we're doing to a community to revive pride in our community.
Can I jump in on something that Jeff just said? And I think,
Absolutely.
and I felt the feeling of that question that was asked, why do we think of Two-Spirit people as an afterthought? And I felt that question, and I felt seen in that question, because I'm sure I've done the same. And I just start to reflect back that day that you and I first met, Jeff. And when we were hosting our first ever Pride event at Alberta Health Services, but we knew that we could not even begin to host a Pride event. It was at the Royal Alex in Edmonton, without starting in a good way with a Two-Spirit elder through ceremony and prayer to lead us in that way. So and I love that. What's important in that is intention. You have to be intentional, and you have to, again, think about who's missing here, and be intentional about engaging at the beginning, not at the end.
And to go on even further, remember how you had talked about, how do we learn from people? But we go up there and we ask them, what do you need? Or who are you? Tell me about you. How can I be your ally? How can I be your friend? How can we exist here together? And that's what AHS has been doing for some time with us, and especially that event you're talking about. But this is somewhat new. This is new. We haven't had Pride events like that. That hasn't been happening at AHS and at different government levels, different organizations. This is starting to gain much more momentum, thereby creating safer spaces, the ability for people to be who they are. That in and of itself improves the health of our community. If we look at productivity, if people are looking at all of that, just so much better.
Nice. Yeah. I'm going to take the opportunity to just add to this conversation as well, because when I think of, when I think of the community of people who are Black and people of color in Edmonton, and whether or not they are confronting themselves on their issues of whether they're being allies as a community to the LGBTQ folks within their communities, this is such an important issue to me. And to me, it's an issue of safety and people's lives. So when a family, because they've been conditioned by social cruelty, decides that they're not going to accept a member of their family because that individual is gender or sexual minority, and turns them out, if that person is also a racialized person, their life is at risk on so many levels, because they are in a society without a safety net. They're disconnected from their culture. They're disconnected from those aspects that would otherwise give them a safety buffer to racism. And it is such a cruelty, I feel. And it's so important for me, for our communities to understand this, because it is my point of view that pre-colonization, our cultures were not so cruel around gender and sexual fluidity. I know that in my own culture, even though colonization has really caused harm such that there is real fear and cruelty and around sexual and gender fluidity. I'm delighted to live on a land that is not my own. I was an immigrant too, but the people here have had that in their culture. And I'm talking about the Two-Spirit culture that's here. And so to me, these issues are so important. And I ask people who do descend from colonization to look back to say, well, what was culture like before colonization? Are you really looking to defend and be cruel on these lines of oppression against your own people when it was not yours to begin with, you know? And I don't think it belongs to anyone. It's absolutely anti-human. Colonization was an absolutely stupid idea that just was not human, was not decently human, and we can undo it. But so I've gone on a rant there, but I really wanted to give my challenge to the BIPOC community to say, handle this in your own community. Take yourself back, because when you turn our people out, you turn them out for, you put their lives at risk, and that's not fair. And I know all lives. So having taken up that space, I'm going to give another moment here. And our final question today, which I'll just add here, whether we get to it or not, because of our because of this line of questioning, is about the insights and resources, the joys that are coming from the 2SLGBTQ plus community, which includes things like the Pride Corner, other things that are happening. So in final words and around here, before we look to see if there's any more questions from our audience, and do try and think about your questions and put them in the chat there. Really try and pick up on something and add something. We want to hear your voice and ask your questions, whether you feel like it's a great question or not, or you feel like no one else will be thinking of it. Please do put that in there. But let's have some final words. Let's come to yourself, Marni, and then we'll go to yourself, Jeff, on tying some of this together. Maybe what are some of the resources in the community that we're bringing out?
Well, first of all, a shout out to the Pride Center of Edmonton and all the great work that's there. That's been a very important source of especially early on in my journey of coming out and finding a place where I could be me at a time when the world didn't know who I was. I think about, there's just so many really great grassroots community organizations that have been doing such important work. I think of HIV Edmonton. I think of Out Loud St. Albert. A family created a space for their own child that has created something that is beautiful for a whole community, and it is really leading the way in a lot of conversations. When I think about Camrose or Central East Alberta, I think of Altview doing really important work in our rural communities where, in a time of COVID, we're finding this connection through Zoom. But gosh, during this last year when a lot of kids and youth were having to live at home and go to school at home, they might have lost their only safe place. And so, finding connections online is important. So, all of you does some great work in Calgary. It's Skipping Stone. They're really great resources. P-Flags, whether it's St. Albert and so if you're a family member or of LGBTQ plus people who needs that support, that's a really important place to go to find connection, to build connection with people who are at different stages of their journey, so that you can find a safe place to support each other. And of course, the amazing Edmonton Two-Spirit Society, who have been a great resource for me, who have taught me, and who I've been really graced with the teachings of Jeff and there's so many people in that group. So those are the first few that come to mind that I think of.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeffrey. Can we hear from you? Oh, and you're on mute.
Yeah, that's helpful. If somebody tells me, at least you can't hear what was being said while not on mute or while on mute. Yeah, I see a lot of work within our community that's been happening over the last several years. I mean, of course, there's been lots going on in many different regards, but our community has been seeking ways to come together and build each other up, be stronger. You heard me mention the network that's going on around Edmonton and reviving what pride is in our community. What's really interesting is the things that they've shared throughout in these circles that we've held to really look at the issues and the things to be addressed by each and all the organizations, especially some of the ones that Marni mentioned. All of you really out there doing the work, making circles and connections happen and ensuring that people are being heard and space is natural. We hear folks like Rarica Now and Shades of Color and grassroots organizations and Water Warriors and other right there on the ground, getting the work done. The summit that we hosted here saw a number, 18 different organizations joined in the middle of COVID pandemic to virtually discuss a full day of what reigniting pride looks like, looking at getting through conflicts and mediation and resolution to our, again, that division of our differences. And I'm more than willing to share that report. And I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thanks.
Okay, super. So I see some questions are coming in. There's a question here. May I ask why there's not a visibly Black representation on this panel, especially in regards to the topic of racism, when we know that Black trans women and other women of color make up a huge number of those who experience violence every year? Were there no Black queer people available for tonight? So I'm not going to put that to our panel so much, but that is a question for the organizers. And I'm asking if maybe the organizers can add, into the chat, there's a response to that question. It is a valuable, thoughtful question in around Black representation. And apologies that I don't feel we can handle it within the panel because we weren't part of that organizing point, but maybe we can talk about, well, I don't know, without the representation here, we've been talking about the need to open up spaces. Absolutely. Okay, so, and I want to do a slight logistics check. When we're going to questions from attendees, did you want me to keep looking for questions in the chat, or were you receiving questions in other places? I need a quick. So here's another question that's come up. Do you have a go-to recommendation for how local small business can support the LGBTQIA2S community and show their support?
Sure. Well, I think there's a couple really great questions in here. So as allies, find queer people, two-spirit people, Black trans women to follow on social media, learn, do the work, find out why there's no representation, find out what are the issues, amplify those voices. And I would use same thing with the small business that you speak out. Are there good resources? The Pride Center of Edmonton, all of you. But again, follow people, learn. There are a lot of people doing this really important work within Edmonton, within community. There's a lot of great in social media, but it's, those are some ways of being inclusive. Thinking about the staff, it's one thing to put a pride flag on your door and saying, hey, we're inclusive. It's another for your staff to actually be inclusive. So how much do they know? What are they truly being inclusive? So you have to look at, what does your staff know? And I think about the first time I go in place, I'm on a call like this, and my tank is pretty full. I'm feeding off the great spirits that are in here with us today and sharing the knowledge. But you know what, folks, there are days when my tank is empty too. And if I go into a restaurant that you speak of or a small business, and if I'm being misgendered, I will sit in my car and sob for 2 hours if my tank is empty, right? So, being mindful that how are you treating your clients? Are you really truly creating that safe space? Because, the simple things that you could do that could cost you nothing as an organization could mean the world to somebody else and change the world for somebody else. So find out what those things are. So learn about the people in the communities and follow what they're saying and follow their lead.
Very nice.
Give money. I love that. Donate to all the charities, all the organizations that I just talked about need your money and need your resource. I love that. Yeah. If you're doing anything else, at least do that.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you highlighted that one there. And I really do want to highlight one of the things that you're saying there, Marni, which is that it's more than, and I might just add my piece to say, it's not, I don't think it's helpful to put up pride flags and claim safety without having done the work. And you're talking about education and a time, spending time on education and making sure all the partners are educated and bringing it through to be able to see things from a 2SLGBTQ plus lens, rather than just saying, hey, I just want you to know I'm a nice person. So
I'm going to jump, I'm loving this because it's not the things that we see you do. What are you doing when we're not watching you? To break down policies, to challenge questions, to really break down the systems that you're involved in. That's the stuff that we don't see you doing. So let's move past the performative stuff. What are the actions you're doing when we're not watching?
So nice, so nice. Jeffrey, let me come to you and final words here in around. So the question was around what a small business can do, and we're just wrapping up with some final words.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, and everything that Marni has shared. This is why Marni is here. Marni is really got is on point for everything. I don't work a lot with small business, like it's not something that I really touch on in topics a lot, but creating that space within that business and within that environment that is, again, safe and natural. I've been to places where that pride flag is out there, but yet I'm in there dealing with some comments that may be trans and homophobic, and I get to go into education mode. That's the kind of person I am. But there's also a lot of people out there that don't have that voice, or feel that they don't feel safe to even have that voice and say it. And they go through just to get what they needed from that doctor, that physician, that store, so on and so forth. So having a flag up there or a sticker saying you are, and there isn't that knowledge and that safe space, is actually just doing more harm, right? You're bringing people in there, and if they say, okay, that's going to be a safe place, and it's not a good experience, well, social media could blow up in a heartbeat, right? We are a community that does want to let each other know, hey, who's safe, where's safe, and if they're not, we also have folks like myself and Marni and many others that will go and provide that knowledge. And Pride Center, right? We invite people into our circle. We don't exclude and hold you out because of our different gifts that we have. So
Lovely. I'm going to just add to this quickly, as someone who is an entrepreneur and supports entrepreneurs, just to give a little bit of guidance on this as well, adding to what has already been said here. I really believe that entrepreneurs have the opportunity to create the world in a way. It starts with a vision, and it goes to actions and structures and seeing outcomes based on what you imagined. And to me, for a local and small business, it goes back to, where are your values within the business? Have you identified them? Have you laid out your vision clearly? And once you have your values identified, how have you demonstrated those values in every policy that you have? And so if it is part of your value system, then you need to look at it through all your policies. And when you start imagining, well, how does this value challenge this policy, and how does this policy change? I think you'll start to notice, as a business owner, you're going to change as a human being. And I always think that the measure of how much work we've done in equity, there's one thing about the work we're doing, but we always have to transform ourselves as human individuals in the work. That's kind of how this works, if we're to get out of the society that we have currently and make a new one. And a big measure of that is who is in your personal life. And I'm not asking you to go out and find queer friends just so that you can have them in your life. But if you don't have them in your life, then you know you have work to do. And so those are some of the things that I was thinking there. We're coming up to time now, and we've hit all our questions from our audience. We've hit all our questions that were on our agenda there. I want to bring us back then to our organizer to wrap up the event for today.
Yes, we want to thank Jeffrey, Marni, and Shalini so much for everything that they brought to this conversation today. And if anyone would like to email us, stay in touch, you can email me at assistant@cfrac.com. It's in the chat, or yes, there you are. And on the next slide, we're gonna also consulting@cfrac.com, and our website is cfrac.com. So we thank you all for being with us tonight, and we will be able to send all of our attendees an email that will share some of the resources that our speakers have been sharing with us tonight, so that you can have access to them. So you can expect that in the next week or so. Yeah, thank you so much.